All right, thanks everyone for joining today. Hello and welcome to this webinar with Illinois Green Alliance and the Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition. My name is Katie Kaluzny. I'm the Associate Director at Illinois Green Alliance, and we're really excited to be hosting this program today, Incentivizing High Performance Affordable Housing, a cost study. Let me start with just a couple of logistics, and then I'll turn it over to our moderator to get started in just a few. You have been muted upon entry, but please type any questions you have into the chat or the Q&A section. And at the end of the discussion, we'll have time for Q&A and answers any questions that came up along the way. I also wanted to let you know that we're recording today's session. And so we'll send a follow-up email that will have resources and links that were shared throughout the day today, as well as a copy of the recording so you can share it with anyone that might have missed it. We'll also have a combined PDF of slides, so you can look through those as well for any charts or diagrams that are a little too small to look at here on the screen. And so I'm going to just tell you a little bit more about Illinois Green Alliance before we get started. The Illinois Green Alliance is a membership-driven nonprofit organization that advances green buildings and sustainable communities for all. Our recently launched 5-year strategic plan pushes the green building industry to meet or get on the path to net zero. And we achieve this work through educational events such as panels and building tours like today, engaging communities and partnering with organizations across Illinois, and by advocating for new policies and legislation. We have a great listing of on-demand recorded webinars that include today's program after today. And we have a number of upcoming events. Each week, we're able to host a program now that we are doing everything by webinar these days. And we also have a listserv that you can sign up to learn more about Illinois Green. And so I'll share the link in the chat in just a little bit. And then I'm going to tell you just a little bit more about our partner for today's program, the Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition. This coalition seeks to develop and implement equitable strategies to achieve net zero emissions from the Midwestern building sector by 2050. A little bit of history about the coalition. Transitioning the Midwest to carbon-free renewable energy can reduce our heavy energy cost burdens, improve public health and safety, and achieve climate goals. And through inclusive and representative processes, the Midwest BDC is working to develop equitable strategies to decarbonize buildings that will reduce rather than exacerbate historic inequities. The Midwest BDC works to build regional capacity to enhance and support existing state and local advocates with equity as a priority focus. I'll share a link to the Midwest Decarb website in the chat, but it's midwestdecarb.org if you want to write it down. And now I'd like to introduce Susan King as our moderator for today's session and also to introduce our speakers. Susan King is a principal with HED Architects. As a studio leader for housing in the Midwest, Ms. King advocates for both attainable housing and green market transformation of the building industry. Her award-winning work includes buildings which integrate social, economic, and environmental responsibility with aesthetically appealing design solutions for underserved populations. Among the other honors, she has been recognized by Green Building and Design magazine with the Women in Sustainability Leadership Award. Currently, she is serving as a board member for the Illinois Housing Council and co-chairing the Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition's working group on zero emission affordable housing. Now I'd like to turn it over to Susan to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Katie, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to moderate this session highlighting the possibilities for high performance affordable housing. This webinar is one of the results of the coalition's work this past year. We have been focused mainly on preparing a proposal on this topic for IDA's consideration for inclusion in the QAP and the next version of the IDA architectural standards. So today, our goal is to demystify the cost burdens associated with high performance building by hearing from some other parts of the country where this has already been successfully implemented. There's already been success in implementing these strategies for affordable housing. We also will see in today's discussion, today's discussion as the beginning of a series of educational sessions on this topic. So now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to kick off today by introducing Kristen Faust, Executive Director at the Illinois Housing Development Authority, to give some opening remarks. So effective November 12th, 2019, Director Faust was appointed Executive Director of the Illinois Housing Development Development Authority. And she brings more than 30 years of affordable housing industry experience to IDA. As the state's chief affordable housing official, Executive Director Faust provides leadership in state housing policy to advance IDA's mission of financing the creation and preservation of affordable housing throughout Illinois. Prior to joining IDA, Executive Director Faust served as president of Neighborhood Housing Services of Chicago, NHS, a community development organization committed to helping homeowners and strengthening neighborhoods. Before joining NHS, Executive Director Faust was Chief Credit Officer and Director of Lending and Network Services at Partners for the Common Good, and served as President of the Enterprise Community Loan Fund, one of the largest non-depository community development financial institutions in the country. Earlier in her career, Executive Director Faust spent 15 years in community development banking in Chicago, primarily with LaSalle National Bank, where she started the community development lending department. And so with that, I'll turn it over to you, Kristen.
Thank you, Susan. And I am so happy to be here today to kick off this panel discussion and to be with all of you. So as most of you know, IDA's mission is to finance the creation and preservation of affordable housing throughout Illinois. And throughout our history, 54 years, the authority has recognized that a commitment to sustainability is complementary to this mission. As planners, architects, developers, property managers, and funders, we recognize the vital connection between affordable housing and healthy communities. So we see that there's a growing need for sustainability and energy efficiency in affordable housing. Nearly 70% of all rental units in Illinois were built before 1980, and 41% were built before 1950, lacking features that are energy efficient, environmentally conscious, cost saving, and health preserving that can be seen in newer construction properties today. And furthermore, investments in sustainability, whether in development or operation or maintenance, they improve the performance and long-term viability of a significant public investment. Those are the IDA dollars going into these projects. And so we really see that despite the upfront costs, energy efficiency measures offer returns through improved building conditions, lower maintenance costs, which in turn free up resources that can be reinvested by the housing provider into the building over the long term. It just really does seem to be a win-win-win. Most importantly, and efficiency improvements also can provide financial and health benefits to the residents, right? And in some cases, it's the housing providers who pay those utility bills, but it's not just utilities. We want healthy environments, and we want the buildings being healthy for the overall community. So we see that there's a real benefit when residents spend less on utilities. They're more stable, they're less likely to move, they're better equipped to pay for other essential expenses like healthcare and groceries and education. And so we see the need to reduce energy costs as really an effective way to ensure housing stability. So for all of these reasons, and adding in the big one, of course, of climate change and global warming as well, IDA takes its responsibility as an environmental steward very seriously. We've incorporated sustainability standards within our funding requirements for years to ensure that low and moderate income families residing in IDA financed homes live in housing that's decent, safe, affordable, and environmentally sound. And the IDA board and Governor Pritzker expect us to continue that emphasis, if not increase our commitment. However, to further this goal, we rely on the expertise of people like you, our public and private partners, to help us identify the features, data, and best practices that most effectively incentivize smart investments in energy efficiency and sustainable buildings. Those of us, it's interesting, those of us working in affordable housing, we're accustomed to working under a premise of scarcity, That's not always good. Affordable housing developers and managers run on very thin margins, even in really good circumstances, and there seems to never be enough funding to fully address all the actual housing needs that we see in our state. So creative solutions are really needed to incentivize greater energy conservation, greater sustainability, without adding significantly to construction and operating costs of affordable housing, because already those construction costs are pretty darn high. So towards this end, we're currently in the process of drafting, as many of you know, a new 2-year qualified allocation plan for the low-income housing tax credits. And one of our primary themes is increasing requirements and scoring components for greener buildings. The plan is in development, but we anticipate updates that encourage the use of the most effective green building certifications that create cleaner, healthier, more efficient buildings, including enterprise, LEED, and passive house, through scoring, as well as requiring some basic thresholds in all tax credit deals. So over the next few weeks, on May 11th, May 13th, and May 17th, IDA's multifamily financing and planning teams will host virtual QAP summits. So please visit our website at IHDA, that's ihda.org, for more details. We encourage everyone here to take advantage of this opportunity to not only learn more about the direction we intend to take with regards to green building, but to bring what you learned during this very panel discussion today and provide your feedback, input, and suggestions to help shape this important policy document. Your perspective is truly invaluable to our process. After the summits, the QAP draft will be out for public comment in July, and we will welcome more formal comments at that time before the plan is published later this summer. Illinois is really fortunate to have an active community of affordable housing practitioners working to meet the changing needs of our residents and our communities. And again, it's really only through these partnerships that IDA is really able to help address the housing needs of Illinois. As we continue to work on addressing the effects of COVID-19 on housing and promote fair and equitable housing throughout the state, building high-performing, environmentally sustainable communities will be an important part of that work. Housing should be healthy and efficient to ensure long-term resident health and comfort, as well as the longevity of the building itself. We have an obligation to our customers, to the public, to our housing counterparts, to each other, and to the planet to do this work. With this in mind, I encourage you to take advantage of the experience and expertise of the speakers today, ask questions, consider the ways in which the affordable housing process, from concept to construction to occupancy, can incorporate long-term environmental, health, and financial sustainability. Because the communication lines are open at IDA, I really want you to know that. This exchange of information is the foundation of the public-private partnership required for what we do and to do it well. And we want to know how we can work together to create healthier, more comfortable homes for our residents. And thank you so much. And I'm going to turn it back now to Susan.
Okay. Thank you, Kristen, for sharing your thoughts and your time with us today. I'm very appreciative of your comments and support of sustainability, and we are really looking forward to our future collaborations in the coming weeks and years on this topic. And so now I'd like to introduce our panel for today's session, and I'll give you the order in which they're going to speak. So first will be Tim McDonald. Tim is the president and CEO of Onion Flats, LLC. He is a licensed architect in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. In 1997, with his brother Patrick, he co-founded Onion Flats, LLC, a Philadelphia-based real estate development design build firm. His service and experience extends into his community by his holding current positions in the Northern Liberties Neighbor Association Zoning Committee, the Philadelphia Sustainability Advisory Board, as well as a previous position on the Old City Civic Association Board of Directors. As a partner in Onion Flats, Tim's role is lead architect and construction manager for many of Onion Flats projects. Tim is a LEED certified or certified lead accredited professional and passive house certified consultant and tradesman. And then after Tim, you'll hear from Travis Anderson, and Travis serves as Placetailor's Director of Innovative Design. With over 20 years of experience, Travis leads embodied carbon analysis, zero net energy building systems, and energy modeling as part of Placetailor's integrated design team. He was the lead consultant for the City of Boston's Department of Neighborhood Development to develop zero emission building guidelines for affordable housing that were implemented in 2020. Travis is a certified passive house consultant and has worked on numerous certified passive house projects with high performance buildings. And then following him, we will have Julie Klump. Julie is also a certified passive house consultant and vice president at Preservation of Affordable Housing, or POA. At POA, she is responsible for design and energy efficiency for development projects and the owned portfolio. Julie assists POA in the acquisition process with building investigation, energy budgeting, scope development, and cost estimates. For new construction, she oversees design development and construction, integrating green and sustainable design. Additionally, she manages the data collection and analysis that define the efficiency efforts and serves as a subject matter expert for all aspects of building performance. And then after Julie, we'll bring it back to Chicago and hear from Charlene Andreas. Charlene is the Director of Building Development at Latin United Community Housing Association, or LUCHA, located here in Chicago. As an architect with over 20 years of experience and a developer with over 10 years of experience, Ms. Andreas has a broad base of knowledge in planning, developing, and constructing affordable housing, in addition to an understanding of community development and finance. Most recently, she was responsible for completing the Tierra Linda Apartments, a $17.4 million development that provides sustainable and healthy affordable housing, including the first FIAS multifamily building in Chicago. Ms. Andreas is a registered architect and a certified occupancy specialist. Then after Charlene, I'll share a few comments and experience in this space before opening up the discussion. So again, please submit your questions into the Q&A feature throughout the presentations today, and we will address as many of them as we can during the discussion portion of the program, which should begin around 3:30 p.m. Central. And so now I'd like to turn it over to Tim McDonald to get us started. And so Tim, the virtual floor is yours.
All right, thanks, Susan. Okay, everybody see that? We're all good? Okay. Well, thanks for having me, Katie and everybody. I'm excited to be here, and I really loved what Kristen talked about. There's obviously new and exciting leadership at IDA. As mentioned, I'm a developer, architect, and builder. We do our own projects, but that's only a portion of what we do. We also have clients. We focus mostly on passive house multifamily projects, affordable as well as market rate. But we also have a green roof and solar company that, you know, we created for our own projects, but we now do these kinds of projects up and down the East Coast. I'm going to show you a few projects today of our own, and then I'm going to tell you about an initiative we started about 5 years ago, and talk about how that ties into the whole QAP conversation. This project is a phase 3 of an 18-year project called The Battery. It's a 25-unit apartment building we completed in 2017, about 17,000 square feet. And I'm going to talk about these projects. I'm not going to get into depth about them, but I'm going to talk about them from the perspective of what are the decisions we made that made it more cost effective. How can you rethink buildings to not just meet this high performance standard, but to be cost effective? That is the core of what we're interested in. This is at the ground floor. We've got 13 parking spaces with a couple of units and a lobby. But every floor, there's a 4-story building. It's very intentionally 4 stories because we didn't want to have an elevator. And so we keep all of our projects below that 5-story threshold, which would need an elevator. These are roughly 500 square foot, 1-bedroom apartments. And you'll hear me talk a lot about the importance of prefabrication with everything that we do. In this case, our envelopes, our passive house envelopes, showed up on pallets, wrapped up this way, where the windows and doors, triple pane windows and doors, are already installed, sealed, the air barriers are installed, the rigid insulation is installed, the weather resistant barrier is installed. This alone cut our construction time by 4 months. And those of you who do financial analysis know what that means in terms of interest carry and when you start creating revenue. This was also the first time we took a risk and said, why do we need a meter for every single apartment when each apartment is going to be using so little energy? Why not just have 1 meter, save a lot of space, a lot of money, frankly, and charge tenants a flat $50 a month rate? And you might say, well, are people going to be abusing that? Well, part of the incentive we built into the facade and that incentive is this: each one of these panels has an LED light above it that if it glows green, and each panel is tied to your apartment, but nobody knows which panel belongs to which apartment. So it's kind of, when you come home, you wonder whether if you're on budget, you're green. If you're not on budget, you're yellow or red, or maybe worse. So it's kind of built into the facade itself as a little tongue-in-cheek thing, but also, wouldn't it be fun to have a conversation with your neighbor about energy efficiency? So this is a certified passive house project in 2018. We built it for $169 a square foot, all in, including the massive solar array you see there, all hard costs. This is what it looks like from the other side, parking, as I mentioned, underneath half the building. The roof, we intend most of our projects to look like this. I mean, we're going to generate power on all of our projects. We're going to try to get to net zero carbon neutrality on all of our projects, but we're not going to take over such a valuable asset as a roof, because we need it to manage stormwater. We need it as open space in these dense urban environments. The interiors are very simple, but clean. Palette of materials, lots of translucent glass that allows these smaller spaces to feel larger. And then, the intent is to generate as much power as we can possibly do. And in the past year, that has translated, those of you who know what an EUI number is, energy use intensity, that's a total energy consumption of the building, and that is in kBTUs per square foot per year. That's 10. And that's extremely low. Now, how low? Well, it's 83% less than a typical code building. And I think what's also interesting here, when we discuss QAPs and points for LEED and points for enterprise green community, points for passive house, I think this is also another common number. These passive house buildings are, even without solar, are using on average half of what a typical Philadelphia affordable LEED building uses. So it's important to keep that in mind. A project we just completed a year ago, perfect timing, by the way, February of 2020, when we're trying to fill an apartment building. Not great timing. 28 unit apartment building, similar size, a little bit larger, 24,000 square feet. But this time we really rethought the whole mechanical system strategy. And I think that that's an important dimension to really getting at the costs, reducing costs in buildings. At $180 a square foot, all in, this building is completely covered in solar panels on 3 facades as well as the roof. You can kind of see, this is a carve out, this is the basement of our office. Actually, our office is here. And so you get a sense of what those solar panels are on the south facade here. They're floating about 24 inches away from the facade. You can see they're somewhat translucent as well. And the intention of this veil, we call it a solar veil, obviously is to generate power, but most importantly is to keep the sun out, as it's a shading device in the summertime, but to let that free heat in the wintertime. And you noticed it's a very tight urban site. So it's also meant to be a visual privacy device. So you can kind of run around in your underwear without any blinds on. And similar to the other roof, this roof is used by tenants to grow their own tomatoes and basil and so forth. These were our projections of energy consumption for a year and production for a year. And we were hoping to generate 20% more than what the residential portion of the building needed. And here are actual numbers from this past year. And we're pretty much right on target, 18% more than needed. It's a net positive building. And obviously that went to the office space, not just the residential. Again, I'll never put a window in on site again. There's absolutely no need for it. This building was panelized. We saved 4 or 5 months on the installation, which meant we got 4 or 5 months of rent going quickly. Similarly, a very small electrical room with 1 meter in and 1 meter out. And in this case, we're charging tenants even less, $40 a month for all utilities. In this case, we went in a decentralized strategy, and if any of those who are interested in why, we can talk about it. But I think what's interesting about this machine is that not only is it 1 per apartment, but there are no line sets, no condensers on the roof or on the outside of the building. It's all 1 packaged unit. So, and it does ventilation, heating, cooling, and this is your exhaust to the outside, and this is your supply to the outside. And then exhaust to your kitchen and bathroom and supply to your living spaces. And that's what it looks like inside the unit. And here's it kind of merged into the cabinetry of it sits nicely, even though it's a pretty big sized unit, sits nicely inside these. By the way, these are 450 to 320 square foot units. So very small. The other thing we took on, and we're always, taking risks and experimenting with different ideas. Typically, in a project like this, there would be a central plant either in the basement or on the upper floor for hot water. And when I say central, I mean 1 location, and then you have to pump that water all, you could be hundreds of feet away from an apartment, but you need to, when you turn this faucet on, you need to have hot water in like 3 or 4 seconds. So you have this thing called a recirc loop that is an entirely separate line of piping that's run with hot water running through it and heat loss through it. And we said, you know what, it takes so much energy to do this. We said, let's rethink how we do hot water in these buildings. And so we referenced, my father was a plumber, so I know plumbing pretty well. And I've always been fascinated by these short horizontal distances from the vent stack, from your sewer stack. And it's for different reasons, but we thought, if we do that, we can really limit the amount of piping and the amount of volume of water and therefore heat loss and so forth. What if we follow the stack? What if we follow the vent stack in a very similar way and locate some tanks in the basement, go straight up, very short horizontal runs to each appliance. And we cut, just in doing that, we cut the energy consumption and the piping in half. But then the really cool thing was we discovered this product that instead of having a recirc loop as a separate pipe that then gets insulated and brought all the way back down, what if the recirc loop went inside the supply for the hot water? And that's exactly what this is. This is a PVC line that when you're feeding your floors and your apartments, at the top, that recirc goes inside the pipe and then comes back to here. So we have not only cut the energy consumption in half, but we're only insulating 1 pipe. So we've cut the recirc energy consumption down by 75%. And these are typical off-the-shelf heat pump water heaters that we just merged together. They feed about 6 or 7 apartments each. And we cut our cost for the hot water strategy alone by 50%. Okay, and the project that kind of started it all off for us is this 3 townhome development. This was our first attempt at passive house, our first attempt at affordable housing, and our first attempt at modular building. It's 3 townhomes, 5 bedrooms for large, formerly homeless families. It became the first certified passive house project in Pennsylvania in 2012. And we built it in a modular factory that we unfortunately were partners in. That's another story for another time. But we learned a heck of a lot and developed a building system that could be replicated into building much larger buildings, not just single family homes. It was our first attempt at a passive house blower door test, and we beat it by 30%. It's easy to do. And this is what that means. On a cold day, all the other buildings around you are essentially radiators. They're just pumping heat outside, and a passive house keeps it in. And they're simple, open spaces with good quality materials, lots of light, triple pane European tilt turn windows, a 5 kW array on each roof, and built at the time, we can't do this anymore, for $129, just under $130 a square foot. We thought, you know what? If we did this at our first attempt, why isn't all affordable housing built to the passive house standard? We built it below what is typically spent on affordable housing in Pennsylvania. So a group of us gathered together and went to the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency and said, how about we just kind of boldly asked, how about you just make all affordable housing net zero capable by 2030? And they actually said yes. And we said, if that's the goal, use passive house as the tool, because we don't know a better tool than passive house to get there. And so they introduced me to the whole idea of what a QAP was. And those of you who don't know, it's an extremely competitive way to get funded. And so they said, here's how we could do it. If there are 120 points total, what if we just put an extra 10 optional points in there for passive house? Maybe some crazy people will try it out. Maybe 1 or 2 projects will come in. Let's give it a shot. So in the first year that we attempted this, 85 projects came in. 38% of those 85 projects that came in as passive house projects. Why? Because somebody else was going to take those 10 points, and it's extremely competitive. And they funded 8 multifamily projects. And the craziest part was the costs were negligibly different. Here are all those costs. And if you average the code built projects with the passive house projects, the passive house ones are the yellow and orange, if you average them for buildings that use 75% less energy, they came in on average at 2.5% more than the code built projects. So PHFA said, this is a no-brainer. Let's keep this going. They built 7 were actually built of the 8 that were funded. And the question was, okay, this is how much they cost at application, but were they built for what they suggested they could build it for? Turns out they were. These are the code built projects. They came in within their contingency. Here are the passive house projects. They were built within their contingency. Okay? So this is not some strange little developer like me. These are multiple developers testing this out. 7 different developers, builders and architects that had never done it before. Okay, maybe that was a fluke. So the next year, 94 projects came in, 10 passive house projects were awarded funding. And here are all those costs. And guess what happened? It flipped, because developers know that this is where we're moving. We need to get creative. So the passive house projects on average came in 2% less than the code built projects. They get creative when they have to. Here are all those projects that are now built. And maybe that was a fluke. This 3rd and 4th year came in. Same thing, exactly the same thing. Here are all those projects, average the exact same. The passive house projects came in less than the code built projects. And this is one I worked on. This is as a consultant, not as an architect. It was for 49 units of veteran housing. Fascinating project. This was an existing building, a historic building, and they added this on after. I won't go into the details of this other than similar thing. Prefabricated strategies for the foundation, for the wall. Very simple, a cost-effective way of doing a foundation where you use the formwork to insulate the building at the exact same time. So it doubles the utility. Here's that insulated formwork, structural EPS foam that the building sits on top of. And here are the walls, prefabricated walls that go in half the time. And at our first test at a blower door, without the drywall, we hit the passive house requirement. And then the final blower door, it was even better. Again, first time these people were doing this. But here is the other really interesting thing, and I'm almost done. I think I've gone over because I lingered a little bit too long. Our owner, our client said, well, wait a second, if we're using a lot less for utilities, I should be able to monetize that. This is what the housing authority allows me for a 1-bedroom. This is what we're calculating it to be. So how do I monetize that? Well, I'm using less than half in terms of the utilities. And then on top of it, this is even, he's saying here that my operating costs are going to be a lot less than this for a whole bunch of reasons. But let's say you just leave that. Say it's just based on utility savings. Here's what happens. Your net operating income goes up, which means you can carry more debt. Okay, and look what he says. Passive House lets you borrow, leverage more money to build more housing. How amazing is that? And then on top of it, their fee was increased because of that. And what he says is, we don't just take that extra money and put it in our pocket, we build more housing. So Passive House may get you to build more housing. Okay, and there it is. And so last, and then I'm done, we said, this was one paragraph for one housing finance agency. What if we just took it to some other ones? Ida was one of them, by the way. We took it to 39 other states. And in 2015, Ida said yes. Ida had extra points in the QAP. I don't think they have them anymore, but 16 to date, 16 states across the country have Passive House incentivized in their QAP. Here are some of those projects that are being built as we speak or completed as we speak. This is a conversation that talks about, I'm not going to get into it, but I'll say this, that you need to give more points to Passive House, because here's what happens when you equate the points to LEED. No projects get built. Here's what happens when you really increase that cost. More projects get built. And then 14 other of these 40 states are on their way, meaning they're building them anyway, even though it's not in their QAP. And I've got tons of data on this if you want it. And lastly, I'll just say that we turned this into an annual conference specifically focused on Passive House and affordable housing. We're going into our 5th year. This was last year's. It's at the end of the summer. I'll let you all know when that happens. And just to totally summarize and in rhyme, I thought it needed to rhyme. The takeaways are, if you want to build cost-effective, high-performance housing, vertically integrate, prefabricate, innovate, generate, legislate, and educate. Like, explore what it means to vertically integrate your companies. Off-site manufacture as much as you possibly can. Really get creative around HVAC systems and utility systems. Turn renewable energy and the generation of renewable energy into revenue, not into a cost, but into revenue. Build it into your capital stack. And obviously, let's get HFAs to increase these points and teach your tenants about how fun and important Passive House is. That's all I got. Thanks.
Travis, you're up.
All right, thanks, Tim. Always exciting to see your presentations firsthand. Let's see. All right, I think are we good?
Looks good, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, everybody. Thanks to Illinois Green Alliance for inviting me to speak today. I'm Travis Anderson, as mentioned, and a little bit about who Placetailor is. We are effectively a family of co-ops that involves PTEH architecture. That is specifically our design wing, where we recently merged with Elton Hampton Architects, which is another affordable housing firm here in Boston, and they do a lot of work throughout Massachusetts. It effectively doubled our affordable housing portfolio. We also have PT Red, or Placetailor Real Estate Development, which is our development entity, and then PT Builds, which is our construction arm, where we do a lot of our projects that we develop. We also will build on our own, but similar to Onion Flats, we have a lot of outside clients, and each one of these entities will work with outside clients. And then we recently launched another kind of fourth arm in the company called PT Tech, where we're looking into panelization and sort of these offsite prefabrication strategies that Tim was talking about. So in 2019, the City of Boston put out an RFP through the Department of Neighborhood Development to come up with a zero emission building standards, which is what myself and a colleague of mine were selected to do, Colin Schless of Thornton Thomas SETI. And I'm just going to speak to that process of how we arrived at these standards that are now being enforced here in Boston, and sort of like the progressive modeling that we did to reach this guidebook that we also developed in concert with the standards. A little bit about the Department of Neighborhood Development. This is an entity within the City of Boston where they provide housing, funding for housing, and also land. So they put out a lot of RFPs and RFQs to allow developers and CDCs to file for these and effectively get awarded, and then they get the land at a lower cost than market rate, and they also provide funding for the actual construction period. So within these guidelines, there's the kind of highlighted these three strategies that came out of former Mayor Marty Walsh's 2030 commitment, and now that's kind of rolled over into Mayor Kim Janey's 2030 commitment, where we're looking to fully define what net zero carbon means for the city. And what we were looking at was developing a series of best practices to increase building performance here within Boston, as well as develop better strategies for retrofit construction as well. So that was something that we considered throughout this. And we looked at how we could sort of take all the different typologies that D&D typically works with and sort of meld them into a more defined zero emission building standard. So part of that process was we started in June 2019. We did a lot of meetings internally with city officials, and then had a series of stakeholder sessions where we reached out to members within the design community, development community, and general contractors, which was great. We would take that feedback and sort of do some initial analysis, or sort of like these feedback loops within the energy modeling, review the results, and then within that analysis come up with the details and standards that would be enacted, and again kind of revisit these again later with another kind of more finalized stakeholder review to make sure that everybody was on the same page, and before they actually got put into place within the city. So with each of these meetings, we always started with what we like to call a zero carbon 101, just to make sure that everybody was on the same page. I know this might be review for some people, but it was always a good thing to sort of to touch on this at the beginning, so we're all on the same page with what we're talking about. And of course, we're talking about carbon dioxide. So we look at CO2 or CO2e, which is a colorless, odorless gas that's in our atmosphere and is typically released by man-made circumstances, whether it's buildings, transportation, all the things that we are currently talking about when we talk about fighting climate change. And part of this reason, we're effectively at an imbalance. So we have too much CO2 entering the atmosphere. The Earth cannot absorb it fast enough. And unfortunately, last month, we reached another new threshold of 421 parts per million of CO2e, which is not a threshold that we want to continually sort of go above. I think the idea is we want to flip that balance and tilt it back the other way, so we can effectively start to slow the effects of climate change moving forward. Also within sort of the Boston region, metro region, about 20% of the housing equals 20% of the CO2 emissions for the sort of the region and different areas. of Somerville and Cambridge combined. And what we're trying to do is really look for these zero emission standards to become the future of housing in ways in which we can do better in new construction. So what do we mean by net zero when we talk about net zero? Well, effectively, there's 4 different strategies what we can look at. So we have ZNC, or zero net carbon on site, where you actually have all the energy consumed on the building is actually produced on, renewable energy is produced on site to help offset it. We have a combination of off-site and on-site renewable energy, where we can take building consumption and have the renewable energy on site overproduce, and then effectively reach out to RECs or other ways in which to get renewable energy credits off site. We also look at strategies for ZNC ready construction. So that's where maybe a project team doesn't have the ability to add the renewable energy on the roof. Well, we would integrate some sort of best practices to help that solar be provided down the road, or ZNC convertible. So let's say you really don't push forward and do an all electric hot water system, but you would want to make sure that all the pumps and storage tanks are actually ready to switch over to a heat pump electric system down the road. But really for this study, we started to look at both kind of the first 2 frameworks, which was the most important to us. So we had the ZNC on-site and the ZNC off-site, were the modeled portion of this study. And then we came up with just some really key simple strategies on how to implement these standards. This is a little bit of architecture 101. So looking at the key passive house principles, thermal bridge free design with optimized insulation, passive cooling, really good air tightness. You can never build an building too airtight. Heat exchange ventilation, so that's when you have a heat recovery ventilator or an energy recovery ventilator integrated with the building, especially when you start to make the shell so airtight. You want to make sure that you're getting fresh air and quality air back into the building for the occupants. There's a lot of studies that are being done around just indoor air quality right now, especially with COVID. And then again, this integration of rooftop PV. So what we're really focusing on here is sort of this idea of simplified massing. So looking at really good surface to volume ratios, or heat loss form factor ratios, where you have a ratio of a conditioned floor area to the exterior envelope, and making sure you don't really start to push and pull the facade too much. The more inside corners with passive house, the more difficult it could get. So you can probably see in Tim's examples that they had a lot of really great surface to volume rectilinear buildings, which makes the build that much easier. And that's a good way to help keep costs down, because it makes all the detailing around that a lot more simplified. Also, orientation, of course, is key. It's really hard in these urban infill environments, but ways in which you can sort of maybe use the roof form to focus a little bit more south, or sort of gesticulate the building a little bit to sort of engage with southern orientation, or maximize daylighting wherever you can. Increased density became a really important aspect of this. We started to look at this less from an actual building perspective and more from a CO2e per person metric. So by putting more people into the buildings, allowing more density, which would effectively help decrease and stabilize things in terms of rent, it would allow us to sort of spread that load of carbon per person across a larger portfolio of people. Percentage of glazing was another thing that we considered. So we looked at vertical glazing, usually within this 18 to 20% range seemed like it was the ideal sort of ratio for window to the wall in order for these buildings to stay more cost effective. Once the glazing percentage starts to go up, of course, you're going to increase the loads on the building, and you might have to do more insulation. And then, of course, air tightness. Again, you can never build a building too tight. So we looked at ways in which to achieve this sort of passive house level 0.6 CFM50. And again, it comes back to that simplified massing. The more inside corners, outside corners, and weaving in and out of details, the harder it comes to achieve that. And again, cost and quality control on site becomes more of an issue. Another aspect to look at here is the overall systems for these buildings. So we like to keep them as simple as possible. Either a ducted or ductless air source heat pump. Ventilation, again, coming through a centralized or decentralized ERV or HRV. We've seen in many cases where you can do a decentralized version of this on each floor, really helps. And then ways in which to mitigate costs with your ERV, the more efficient you can make your ERV within this kind of 80% range, we actually can see the shell of the building doesn't need to be quite as insulated because you're actually recovering the heat within that building at a higher percentage. So you could take maybe what once was an R35 wall and then reduce that down to an R22 or R25 in some cases. And again, the heat pump hot water systems largely used multifamilies if you're doing kind of the single distribution and Aramec or Colmec are a lot of the new heat pumps coming on the market to make it a more centralized system more effective. And of course, as the efficiency goes up with all these systems, operational costs go down, which we saw within Tim's presentation. And again, when you're talking about heat pumps, we're talking about an efficiency that's 200 to 400% more efficient of what's delivered to the site. Baseboard electric heat, as an example, is sort of this 1-to-1 ratio or 100% efficient. And then when you look at a gas boiler system, really the max efficiency, and they're hard to find, would be in this 98% efficient market. So as people often will counter that, well, gas is cheaper, my hot water is going to be cheaper in cost, you're actually gaining much more by increasing the efficiency of these systems. And you're going to be way out ahead as gas prices tend to go up and maybe electricity prices start to stabilize more. And again, looking back at this balanced ventilation, so increasing indoor air quality aids in the airflow through the home, it exhausts the stale air, and again is best for the overall occupants. So the one question that often gets asked is, what does this cost? Well, in order to get there, again, we modeled these 4 different typologies: a small multifamily building, typically consisting of 5 to 10 units, 3-story multifamily, which would be about 10 plus units, a 4-story multifamily, where we're starting to get into a little bit more of a podium build, and then a 6-story multifamily, where again, a higher podium type building. And then we took these typologies and we actually modeled actual buildings that we had within our portfolio in the background. And Colin and I used a hack for WFI that allowed us to, WFI is an energy modeling program for Passive House. And this hack allowed us to parametrically model each scenario, and kind of doing this sort of thread metric. We were able to kind of set the limits of where we wanted the building to function in terms of performance, and set that baseline cap down to a zero emission building. And within this kind of threading, it allowed us to see the most efficient path to get to a zero emission through each of those different assemblies. So we're looking at walls, roof, floors, windows, and system efficiencies. And then we took this analysis, and kind of in our first run, we actually had a really hard time achieving it and having it be cost effective. So this, as we were looking at it from an individual building basis, again, we return to that idea of the per person metric. And once we do that, it allowed us to take these portfolio, all the buildings within D&T's current portfolio and upcoming portfolio, and look at the kind of predetermined occupant load. So we would take these sort of higher performing buildings because it was easier to achieve in the smaller scale, the zero emission. And then once you have sort of the taller buildings that are more dense with less roof area, meaning less on-site renewables, we were able to sort of portfolio all of these together and come up with this metric of 0.77 tons of CO2e per person within the building. So then we went back and revised this thread modeling and went through another series of iterations under this per person metric. And I should also point out that the tons per person are based on the New England ISO grid. So this is current emissions that we're looking at. So the whole idea within this study was this is everything that we can do and achieve now. And then from that, we applied our cost metrics, again, just looking at the modeled assemblies, and we found about a 1 to 2% increase in cost for buildings to meet the zero emission standard. Also, unbeknownst to us, within this modeling, all these buildings achieve passive house, and this 0.77 CO2e metric also relates back to a study that FIAS did a few years back when they were sort of looking at this carbon per person analysis too. So that sort of backed up a lot of our modeling data, which we were quite happy with. And then of course we looked at the overall operational costs. So we're seeing a reductions up to 25%. The 3-story multifamily where it says -1%, that's because that actual building was modeled with an electric resistant hot water system, which is an interesting thing to note. So we had that 100% efficiency within the hot water system. And as you start to do these buildings, you find that hot water really becomes the thing to it's your biggest cost burden in terms of operational cost, because all the other loads are so low. So hot water becomes sort of the next frontier. And then most recently, we were pushing to push for legislation for our new climate bill here in state of Massachusetts. And a bunch of colleagues and us got together and sort of came together with our best in class buildings and created a really quick report to send to the governor while he was kind of hemming and hawing about the climate bill, to really show them that if they pushed legislation through that bettered buildings here in the state of Massachusetts, that it would not hurt the housing or construction industry in general. So by looking at these various projects, we found there's about 1 million square feet of affordable housing here in Mass that were within a -1% to 1% cost difference above or below market. And these are all passive house certified, pre-certified, all electric buildings, some of which are actually energy positive projects that are found throughout the state. So this, again, really kind of helps to back up this argument that I think the cost burden is really no longer there when we're talking about operations. And then this is all done prior to renewables. So, we're seeing an average reduction about 20% further with renewables in terms of operation. And then we're also seeing pretty short-term ROIs once renewables are added to the building. That's because the operational loads are so low that the overall return on investment is decreased when you add the renewables. And of course, actually owning the solar outright is the best way to achieve that. So how do we really get there throughout our industry? And it kind of goes back to Tim's sentiments, really looking at integrated project teams, do these early energy modeling studies or feasibility studies really early on, kind of like at early schematic design. Verify your assemblies constantly with the energy model or CPHC throughout. Develop efficient system strategies and controls with your MEP. Refer to best practices for guidance. Work with your GC for pricing throughout the entire time. So actually get this sort of integrated practice on board really early so that you can kind of keep your cost controls locked in as you move forward. And also bring in your renewable energy consultant early on. So you can talk about different schemes of how to use that sort of rooftop area that's available. Maintain an elegant and simple design language. Keep in mind your window to wall ratios, air sealing strategies, and maximize the amount of roof area. And then also what we found with within this study that a lot of the labor cost differences would really come from quality assurance and quality control on the site. So the sort of project manager or construction manager actually on site, being there and having the knowledge and the ability to verify assemblies, talk through these assemblies effectively, and make sure that they're being implemented correctly while the construction is in action, because the design team, they really can't be there every day. And we also saw this as opportunities to train local labor and bring that into the practice, and opportunities for operational guidance for property managers moving forward, or even occupants. It's great to design these and construct these buildings to be low load, but it really comes down to how they're used. And it's really important for people that are part of these buildings to understand how to make sure that they function correctly. So with that, I will hand it off to Julie, who's going to talk a bit more about upfront costs and operations.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me today. As Susan mentioned, my name is Julie Klump, and I manage design and building performance for POA. And I'm going to get to the next slide. We're in 10 states and 11 states in DC, and you can see from the map we're in most climate zones, which makes building efficient buildings and financing efficient buildings interesting. For the sake of this presentation, I inserted the QAP points in the states that we own buildings, and you can see that it's not a lot of them. We haven't taken advantage of QAP points for passive house, but we do have several passive house projects in the works. We care about energy and water. We pay $14 million in energy bills every year. And in order to keep up with it and analyze our new construction and rehab projects, we have become a bit obsessed with data. We use a third party to collect all of our utility bills, and we use a couple of energy platforms in order to analyze them. That highlights anomalies for us and helps us analyze projects that we do. Next slide. So these are some of our passive house projects that we have in design. The one in the middle is actually under construction. And, as I've already heard from the other speakers, why passive house? It's really the way to get to net zero. You have to start with energy efficiency, and you have to start with the enclosure. And if we can get to passive house certification, which is pass-fail, it's not a prescriptive program like LEED or some of the other ones. And so it's pass-fail. You either get there or you don't. And it ensures a low energy. And as everybody has heard about the carbon neutrality goals around the country, in Chicago and other places, we're not going to get to decarbonization that we want to unless we approach new construction with this sort of rigor. Next slide. I mean, we've talked about that what passive house gets us is a robust enclosure. And not only does that, allow for low energy, but it also provides comfort for residents and resiliency in power outages. The enclosure can maintain heating or cooling for days. We use all electric ventilation systems, the domestic hot water. We have some projects that we're shooting for all electric. We use all electric ventilation systems. So as part of the decarbonization, we're really striving to get to all electric buildings. And backup power, we're doing a lot of feasibility studies right now on solar storage as a way to eliminate the fossil fuel generator. And just a couple barriers, the cost of gas versus electric and domestic hot water, and then obviously the solar storage programs are still a little out of our reach. Next slide. So these are two of our Boston projects. The one on the left is the one under construction. the one that's under construction was actually not started out as passive house. It was designed, and because of the codes in Massachusetts, which we call the stretch code, good energy codes, and because of POA's basis of design, this one was very close. And so we thought that with some utility incentives that we received and also a grant, that we should push to certify it in passive house. And this one is a 2% premium over that energy code basis. And as you can see in the incentives listed at the top, we are given $3,000 per unit utility incentive. And we also got a grant of $4,000 per unit from the Mass Clean Energy Center. And so the 938 was probably double of our premium on this project. And the project on the right, is Bartlett Yard. It's a senior light building. And again, we got $3,500 there for passive house, as well as a grant that we received in order to pursue passive house. Bartlett, the one on the right, is designed to be 100% electric. We have a solar storage proposal to make this building completely fossil fuel free. In terms of net zero, we have a pretty good size array on the roof, maximizing as much space as we have, but we'll still require some offsite renewables that we're looking into how we might procure that in order to have a net zero building that's all electric. Next slide. So this is our project, our passive house project in Chicago. This is the C40 on Garfield Street. 2 buildings. One of them, phase 1, is a rental building. Phase 2, potentially some sort of co-op or ownership structure there. We're hoping for net zero. We probably won't produce as much power as we need, so we'll probably also be looking to buy some offsite renewable source just to cover any gap that we have. In Chicago, the incentives, you get $385 per square foot from Slipstream, which is not a passive house building, but it's a high performing building, but it's capped. So getting to passive house beyond their requirements, is there's not any boost there. And then the Illinois Clean Energy Center also has a grant for net zero, which we will try our best to get these buildings to net zero. And they have a $2 million per project that we hope to take advantage. Whenever we sort of just wanted to mention, when we move into a new market, the projects I just showed you are our first projects of passive house in Massachusetts, and it seems like given it's a 2% premium, it's not necessarily a cost burden for us, but it requires a lot of time. We're training architects, we're training engineers, we're training GCs, we're training subs, and we're bringing them along in terms of how to estimate a passive house, how to demystify the whole thing. So we plan to do the same thing in Chicago, and it's just a way to sort of help us get these teams to the place where there is cost parity, local workforce can be involved, and we can make this passive house sort of a standard. And I also think there's some real market influx of high performance windows that are making the prices a little more competitive on windows. Next slide. So rather than just talk about new construction, which I think is the easy way to get to net zero, I also wanted to talk a little bit about retrofits. These buildings are all in the Northeast, and a couple of them have been completed in the last couple of years, and some are about to start construction. And whenever we have an opportunity to overclad because the brick is failing or the clapboards need to be replaced, we always add rigid insulation, high performance windows, roof insulation. One building, we're enclosing the attic into the enclosure. So we expect to see 40–50% reduction just because of the enclosure. Next slide. And these are tables, these are from performance highlights from projects that we do. You can see the ones in the back are close to 30% savings, and those are ones that that included the enclosure upgrade. The one in the front is unfortunately a Chicago project. That's not why it's unfortunate. It's just unfortunate that we were only able to hit 12%, which replaced all the heating systems with high efficiency, but with an enclosure upgrade, we can really get it to 30%. And I think given the carbon neutrality goals, new construction, we're kind of getting closer to figuring that out, but I think there's a whole inventory of existing buildings, and that we need to start really figuring out how to address them and get those loads down and covered with PV, and see how close we can get to net zero in order to achieve our decarbonization goals. And I think then the next bucket is going to be the historic building, which has its own challenges. And I'm going to stop there with my slides. I just would really encourage and look forward to the conversations around the QAP allocation points for Illinois. We have a lot of projects coming up in Chicago. We love being in Chicago and working with IDA. And I just will encourage any sort of shift in the priorities to enclosure. It's hard to do enclosure upgrades on unit turns, and any way that we can get passive house or a deep energy retrofit incentivized in Illinois and Chicago will go a long way to make healthy, comfortable, affordable units. And I'll turn it over to Charlene.
Hi, thank you so much. So Charlene Andreas with LUCHA here in Chicago. We are an affordable housing developer, owner, manager. And next slide, I'll be talking about the Tierra Linda project that we did here in Chicago. So just to orient you, we can go to the next slide, Katie. This project is located just north and west of downtown Chicago. It is 45 units on scattered sites, 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units, built to several green initiatives, and it received a competitive allocation of 9% tax credits from the city of Chicago, along with some other soft sources. Next slide. So when we started doing this site, it's a scattered site. We have 12 sites, and we had not really been looking at passive house at that time, but LUCHA's executive director had the opportunity to be at the 2015 Paris Climate Conference and had learned about the passive house being done in Germany, and came back and was asking if it was being done in Chicago. And we decided to meet with BIAS here in Chicago and discuss this project with them, and could we maybe look at doing that with Tierra Linda. And because we had already gotten our allocation via the QAP with the city of Chicago, any incremental costs would not be covered. So we chose to just do one location, which is this location number 6 on the site. And then we were hopeful that with the opportunity of having a building just a block north at location 5 on the site, which was built to Energy Star, that maybe we could get some kind of study done in the future. Next slide. So as you've seen in the previous presentations, the shell of the building is pretty critical with passive house, and with the Chicago code at the time for this building, we had to use a metal stud framing, which created some issues with thermal bridging and the continuous insulation. So we ended up using a EPA system on the exterior. Also on the exterior, we went with some triple glazed windows from Zola. There weren't as many manufacturers out at the time. I was actually surprised to see how many manufacturers are on the FIAS website now. We went with Zola because the contractor had felt that was best for installation. And then we have an energy recovery ventilator in each unit. We did go back and forth between centralized versus in each unit and decentralized. LUCHA felt that the decentralized was the best option for tenants and controllability of their own units. And for heat and air conditioning, we had a heat pump system. So that addressed essentially the overall design. And I would say it was a very iterative process between the architect, having the contractor, and even the subcontractors on a number of calls. There was no way to do this in Chicago at the time, especially as the first building, without having that full team collaborating throughout the process. Our architects, Landon and Baker, were great eco achievers, were super helpful. So next slide. So here's where we were hopeful that we would end up between the Passive House building and, like I said, we had the Energy Star building to the north. We were looking for considerable savings by going to the Passive House. There were some goals based on the 2030 challenge, but for LUCHA in particular, these tenants would be paying for their heat and air conditioning and their electrical. And as a housing cost, it was really critical that we wanted to achieve a greater degree of affordability. And so that was a driver for us in choosing to go this route. Next slide. And we were fortunate enough to have actually a study completed at these two buildings. Slipstream, with some support from ComEd, did do a study of the Passive House building versus the Energy Star over the past 2 years. So late 2018 into late 2020, they were collecting multiple data points every single day and every single second from these buildings. And what we saw and what the conclusions from that are is on a weather normalized basis, the FIAS building requires 65% less delivered heating energy going to the spaces to provide heat versus the Energy Star building. Total site energy use is a third less. The EUI is 33.4 versus the baseline is essentially about half. And then energy costs were 19% less. We had really hoped to achieve a greater degree of affordability there, but what comes into play is actually fixed fees between your gas bill and your sort of electric bill that you get charged, everyone gets charged. That was actually a factor, along with we do know here in Chicago that electricity is more per unit of energy. But like others have said, we had such a great savings overall on energy use with this building that was still a benefit and still a savings there. And greenhouse gas emissions are a quarter to a third less at the Passive House building versus the Energy Star. On a cost standpoint, we did pay an incremental cost more to build the Passive House. It was our first building. It was our, essentially everyone on the team, it was their first building. What we did see from the study is that air sealing and also the heat recovery with the energy recovery ventilator that we have in each unit were really the most impactful per unit of cost for the Passive House building. The windows were also a close third, the triple glazed windows. The insulation is, a little more distant fourth, but for sure, like the underslab is not as much of a factor. So you can see that there's really some basic principles here of building to Passive House that deliver a high impact, both from energy efficiency, but we also saw indoor air quality is a consideration with these buildings. We were looking to build healthy housing. The ventilation, balanced ventilation helps us with that. And so we're really excited by what we achieved, and we hope to see better achievements and more buildings going forward in Chicago with the Illinois QAP, hopefully. And with that, I'll pass it to Susan King and let her talk about an upcoming project.
Okay, I'm now going to conclude the formal presentations with a really brief overview of what I'm calling the state of things in Chicago through the lens of a current project. So the project is the Conservatory Apartments currently shown on the screen. The developer is Interfaith Housing Development Corporation, and we are pursuing Passive House certification. And the project is also participating in the Living Building Challenges pilot for affordable housing, pursuing the energy pedal. Next. The site is shown on this map in red. It's directly north of the Garfield Park Conservatory, which is number 2 on the map, and thus the name. Go ahead, next. It is a 4-story building. It's a single room occupancy, and it will provide 44 studio type units when it's completed. And basically there were 2 factors that pushed it to pursue Passive House. And the first factor is next. The first factor was the fact that IDA's QAP for permanent supportive housing, which is the primary funding for the project, incentivized it through their scoring last year. So giving 10 points for passive and other deep green efforts, as you see on this excerpt from the QAP, just made it appealing for Interfaith to say yes to that. And then on the cost side, for the second factor, go to the next slide. It was the adoption of the new Chicago Building Code that is allowing us to build with wood. So in our early costing, we applied the savings that we believe we're getting for the structure and also the cladding, which in this case, similar to Charlene, is an EFIS system. We put that towards better windows and a highly efficient HVAC system plus the ERV. So also on a positive note, since Charlene mentioned the Tierra Linda windows, our windows are triple glazed, but we didn't have to go to Germany to get them. So there are options here now, and I think that is also progress in the right direction that we should acknowledge. So go ahead, my last slide next. While the allowance of wood structure with a fully sprinkled, it'll be fully sprinklered with a fire protection system, is a huge step forward. I will just end this by saying that this project is at the upper limits in terms of like size and what you can do in Chicago in wood. So with that, I would like to once again thank all of the panelists and Director Faust for being here today, and like to ask everybody to turn their cameras back on. I know we're running a little bit over time here, but let's try to answer some of the questions that haven't been answered. I think I'm going to kick off the Q&A actually with a quick question to Julie from something that she said, and then maybe a general question to everybody else. We'd also like to tackle whatever has not yet been answered in the Q&A, but go ahead and keep putting stuff in there, because I think we can, if I know time is important to everyone, but I think we can run a little bit past 4 o'clock. But Julie, if you could, especially as we talk about incentives, if you can elaborate on the Illinois Clean Energy Community Foundation's dollars, because a year or so ago, you could not get that for tax credit deals because of the LLC. They will only give that money to a true not-for-profit who's owning the building outright. Has there been progress in overcoming that and getting that money? That would be big news.
Yeah, that's a question that I can't answer because we're a nonprofit. There's a way we can get that money into our deals. The trick for us on this one is the fact that it has to be net zero, right? Because it's really hard unless you cover the exterior of your building like Tim did, to get to net zero. There's just, even the best enclosure out there, it's hard to get to net zero, with a PV array that sits on the roof. So we're going to have to buy offsite renewables in order to meet the net zero, but we are planning to do that. So as far as it coming into the deal, we're a nonprofit.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, a lot of I think if developers on the call are as well, but so you don't have to form an LLC to do that deal that's where we've hit that obstacle before. They would not fund us because we were a tax credit deal that the real owner of the building is an LLC, and it was just a brick wall we couldn't get through. They would not fund us, even though the developer was a not-for-profit.
I think, I talked to the project manager even was it this morning or yesterday about it, and it doesn't seem to be a barrier for us.
Okay.
And whether
so
that's
progress.
because we do form an LLC for every project, but it may be that we're bringing the money into the nonprofit and then we're giving it or loaning it supposedly for nothing into the deal. I don't know. That's how we've done it in the past.
Yeah,
Okay.
it depends if you have a tax credit investor in the deal. If you have a tax credit investor who's a for-profit entity, they won't likely be able to fund. Even though the developer, the general partner, the managing partner is a for-profit entity. So.
Okay, sorry, I don't want to distract, but since we are talking about incentives, and because that used to be a good source of money, and then again they had changed their rules. So so my overall question to any or all of you, out of everything we've heard, and we've heard a lot today, it's a lot to process. What would you say has been one of the most impactful strategies you have utilized in building high performance, affordable housing, especially considering upfront costs and operations? I don't know who wants to take that one. Charlene?
Well, I mean, I thought a lot of what Tim showed were some really great strategies. You know, we struggled with the whole idea of decentralizing or centralizing, like the ERV and the furnace and that, and we went back and forth. And then there's just, you know, you're trying to consider how the tenant and the residents are going to use the space. So trying to address some of that also in comfort levels. So those are conversations I think as more and more people are building this, and like the hot water strategy to me was like ideal. I thought that was a great idea. And I think the key here is that like you have a contractor, an architect, and somebody thinking through all those strategies together. I don't think without a contractor on board and without a consultant on board that like you can be thinking through those kind of strategies and being that innovative. If you have to do a bid at the end of the project, that's really going to make it difficult to do passive house.
I think that's a big deal, is having pre-construction, because inevitably, you know, when you're doing a passive house, the collaboration that has to happen, and Tim's, you know, he sits at the table by himself and he can collaborate, right? Maybe he talks to his brother once in a while, but he's lucky in that way. Yeah, or right, or you know, being the builder is helpful, right? But we can bring the builder in. If anybody requires us, we have some places that require us to bid the job. D&D, Travis's buddies, you know, they require us to bid the job, and it's in a non-passive house, just to throw drawings over a fence and have somebody miss out on all the collaboration that's happened with architects and engineers, and then to have to bring those subs and GCs along. And, you know, we've had so many experiences where we say passive house and the ventilation system doubles in cost. We have a meeting and we train them and it shrinks back to, you know, half the cost. And so just, you know, example after example of saying, we don't need a specialized caulker, you know, to make this passive house. Everybody can do it. The sequence might be different, but we're still swinging hammers, you know, we're still, you know, building buildings. So I think the training of subs and using the pre-con, I think that's key.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. The collaboration is essential, vertically integrated practice. And I always think about, there's an architect up in Portland, Maine, Jesse Thompson of Kaplan Thompson Architects, who talks about stealth passive house, where you sort of insert these things within the spec and don't make a big deal about the high performance. It's just sort of what you got to do to make the building, and you won't get this kind of scary prices coming back. If you're promoting it as a zero net energy building from the outset, it might make the bids come in a little higher because people just assume that it needs to cost more. But if you approach the building as just like it's a standard building, it just performs really well, we're just gonna make it and get it done, I think that's really helpful.
I could not agree more. And I'm just gonna give a tiny example about that. I went to my framer. This is how we communicate and collaborate with our subs. I went to I didn't tell my framer that we were building a passive house. I just went to him and I said, hey, can you give me a price on getting the framing up, installing the windows, installing the air barrier, installing the exterior insulation, installing the weather resistant barrier, right? Because he's got to go around the building a couple of times to do that. And he gave me a number. And then I said, okay, if it shows up on the site with the windows in, I don't have to install the windows? Nope. And the air barrier? Nope, it's already attached. And the insulate, it's already attached. He's like, oh, that's easy. Boom. Versus sitting down with them and saying, okay, listen, we've got to really train everybody for weeks on end. There are these special air barriers that you're going to have to like take a graduate course in. I mean, it's been my thing the whole time. It's like, don't make it special. It's not.
Yes, great. And so there is one unanswered question in our Q&A here. And I'm not sure, maybe it's directed at Travis, is the offsite solar through a community solar system? So I'm not really, you don't remember who talked about offsite solar, maybe it was Julie. If so, is that through the building or tenant account when it goes off site? I think is kind of the question. That was from Dan Mooring. Does that resonate with anybody?
So we're gonna need offsite solar in order to get to net zero. I haven't figured out how to do it. But because we do mostly central systems, residents might have a meter to pay plug loads and lights, you know, because we can't bill in Massachusetts for utilities. We might let them have that load. Any solar on-site or off-site will come into the building, offsetting all the electric load that the owner pays for, which is the majority of the load.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a variety of ways to do it in mass power purchase agreements, SRECs. There's all certain ways to get kind of these offsite renewables included. So it's relatively complicated, as I'm sure Julie is well aware of.
So I know we're probably at time because I'm seeing Katie, but now I see everybody's waiting till the last minute to ask their questions. But I'll just reply about the city of Chicago. That we don't know. They're on our list. We've been working the coalition anyway. We've been working the past year on IDA, and DOH's things came out sort of. I don't even know if I want to say a surprise to us, but we didn't. And you know, we were focused on IDA at that time, but they are on our list, and I know that they're overdue to update their sustainability stuff. So we're hoping we can work with them in the same way that we're working with IDA.
I'm going to just jump in, Susan and panel, because I want to thank all of our panelists for answering the questions so actively in the chat and in the Q&A throughout the session so that everyone hopefully got their questions answered there. But we also will cut and paste those questions and answers for people that maybe missed them or weren't following along with the chat to get those questions answers and send that out in the follow-up email too. So you can see what was asked and how it was answered, and panelists, I'll give you another opportunity to answer those questions before I send it out and make sure everyone had a say in what they wanted to say there. But I wanted to thank everybody for attending, everyone for presenting. I want to thank Kristen again for joining us with some opening remarks from IDA. And I wanted to just go around the room really quick for some final thoughts. A takeaway, one thing someone should do, or tell their friend when they see them next, or incorporate into their next project in 30 seconds or less. And I'm starting with Travis.
Follow neck down principles. Don't overthink it and just do it and get it done.
Awesome. Julie.
Get the enclosure right, whether you're doing a rehab or new construction, it matters and it makes a huge difference.
Charlene.
I would echo what Julie said. The shell is really critical, like pay attention to that, the air sealing, but also we just need the outcomes show that this is, you know, the way to go. We're saving energy, we're reducing carbon. We just got to keep following all these innovations and build the passive house and the living building challenge and move the needle forward.
Tim.
We don't have 30 years. We don't have 20 years. We have 10 years. And so this isn't about one building at a time. This, in my opinion, this is about policy, massive shifting of policy at scale, which means every affordable housing agency in every state needs to, in the next 2 years, change their policies and incentivize carbon neutral, net zero energy buildings, because buildings are responsible for 40% of our issue. And if we don't, then this has all been fun, but it's pointless as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. And Susan, bring it home.
I don't want to follow Tim. No, just kidding. I was going to say, so on my, we're in the early days on conservatory, but WUFI models during the funding application. Don't wait till you're funded. We did it, with the PPA. So
Awesome.
That's my advice. You note it's never too late to start.
Well, thank you. Thank you all again. Thank you for sharing all of your great content. Thanks everyone for being so active in the chat, asking questions. We'll follow up with the email with the recording of the presentation, the Q&A answers, and also some of the next steps that we talked about, the items that Kristen talked about at the beginning about ways to engage with IDA in their comment process, and any of the reports and links we talked about today. So thank you all again. Have a wonderful afternoon, and thanks for sticking with us a few minutes past the hour. Have a good one.